welcome. This is actually a topic that I think a lot of people are interested in, and you should be interested in whether you went to a good law school or didn't go to a good law school, because law firms evaluate people in ways that a lot of times people don't understand. If you didn't go to a top law school, it doesn't mean you'll ever be in a top firm. And if you're a top firm right now that you got in because of law school, it doesn't mean you're going to stay there forever. So I'm going to talk a lot about this today, about what matters to firms, and it's much more important than law school. Law school, by the way, is only a signal. It's a signal that starts earlier in your career based on your ability to take the LSAT, get good grades, but over time, it matters less and less. So right when you graduate and you're in law school, the law school you went to does matter to some extent. I mean, it matters because out of the tens of thousands of people that are coming out of law school each year, law firms can hire from the best attorneys and from the attorneys that are often from the best schools, got the best grades. So if you were a large law firm, you would do the same thing. You would take a look at everyone that's graduating. You would look at the people from the best law schools who did the best there, and you would try to hire the best people you can. And that's absolutely what happens. So you will be, to a great extent, either limited or helped by your law school when you get out and when you're in law school. But there's a lot of things that become much more important than your law school after you've been out a long, for a few years. Your practice area matters a great deal. Your personality, the reputation you build for yourself, and a lot more. And as you are, 2, 3, 4, 5 years into practice, the law school you went to doesn't really matter as much. And as a matter of fact, what happens to a lot of attorneys is they go to good law schools, and then in law school, they get the sense of entitlement. They're entitled to make this much money. They should be treated in a certain way based on the law firm they're in. Certain law firms that may not be the top law firms are lucky to have them. And so they think this way, that they should deserve special treatment. And what happens to them is law firms will eat them up. They will give them poor reviews. They will find problems with their work. They will make it difficult for them. And so this is what happens to a lot of attorneys with top law schools. They get into firms and they fail because they come in with an attitude. And your law school credentials matter, but if you act like that and you think that you're important because you went to a better law school than people that you're working with, then you will start getting poor reviews, no assignments, and all sorts of problems that happen to attorneys from top law school. So just think about it from the perspective of, if you went to a top law school, you may have a lot of problems in your career. If you act like you're better than people, if you don't learn, you think you know everything, and that is something that a lot of attorneys from top law schools do, and it ends up causing them problems. So the law school you went to, as I said earlier, is just a way for the law schools or for attorneys to evaluate you based on tens of thousands of people that are coming out. So if you did really well in law school, you went to a top law school, that's going to help you initially in your career and getting into a firm. But after that, it's going to matter much, much less, because the law firm you're at, the law firm you get into actually matters more than the law school you went to. And then over time, things that you do with your practice and how you approach your career are going to matter far more than law school. So I'm going to try to give you some advice here in order to stay employed for the longest time with the best firms, and to get a job with the best firms, even if you didn't go to a top law school. Again, law schools are important when you get out, but the idea that, someone is better from another law school, from better law schools can matter, but as time passes, it matters, much less. So I do want to talk a little bit about why law schools matter to some extent and what they show. If you are able to get into a top law school, it shows that you're obviously very smart. It shows that you worked very hard in college. It also shows you probably had a very high LSAT score. Doing well on the LSAT, it does have some bearing on your aptitude as an attorney, because you're able to distinguish between arguments. You're able to point out arguments that don't make sense. You're able to figure out complex puzzles. You have the ability to read well. And so all these things can show your aptitude to practicing law. And those are, I'm just going to be completely honest with you, your LSAT performance does show a certain level of aptitude to practicing law. Doesn't mean that if you did horribly in the LSAT, you won't be a good attorney, but it is a way for law schools, to evaluate people that when they're very young. When you're an attorney, any attorney, as I'm sure you're aware, if you practice law for any period of time, your job really is to sit behind a desk most of the time and look at papers and analyze things and reach conclusions. And so you could get into a good law school by going, and I see people going to things like Florida State and majoring in fashion and then doing really well in the LSATs and getting into top law schools. Law schools also care about where you went to college to some extent, but when it comes down to it, it's really just about your grades and LSAT scores. I had a guy working for me once. He was a firefighter, and then he went to community college, like Santa Monica Community College, got a 4.0, and then he transferred, I think, to UCLA and finished his work there, and he got very good grades there. He took the LSAT and he got a very good score and got into Harvard Law School and several other schools. He had no extracurricular activities, just good grades and an LSAT score, and it's really all that matters. So, you can go to any school pretty much and do well in the LSAT and get into Michigan, Columbia, and all sorts of places. I mean, it just shows that you did well in your LSAT and have good grades. Good grades mean that you are very dedicated, you work hard, you can impress professors and so forth, and good LSAT scores mean you have the ability to figure out complex problems. And just to be completely straightforward and honest with you, the best attorneys, to be a high level attorney in a big firm, the LSATs can help you because it'll enable you it shows you can figure out very complex things and reach conclusions and make arguments that other people can't. I do want to make a couple quick points that a lot of those skills are very good for corporate law, for litigation and things, but not everybody goes into practice areas where you're working on behalf of giant companies. You can do immigration, you can do all these different trust in the states and all these different things where LSAT does, where that type of skill doesn't matter. But just to be completely straightforward with you, if you did really well in the LSAT, you do have some sort of aptitude when you take it, and it doesn't mean you can't develop later, but it's important. I mean, being able to do puzzles and figure out solutions is important. And so the odds are that if you went to a good law school, you have the ability to read things very quickly, understand what you're reading. You have the ability to sort through arguments and decide which argument's right or wrong. And then you have the ability to do puzzles and things that also test your logical ability. And that's what attorneys are paid to do. They're paid to read a lot of stuff. They're paid to reach conclusions. They're paid to, find arguments that don't make sense. And that's why the LSAT's important, and more so than your grades. So if you went to a top tier school and did well there and got good LSATs, then the odds are pretty good that you are coming out of school with some aptitude to practicing law. And if you're not among this type of people, then you have some obstacles, but I'm going to tell you how to overcome them. And you certainly aren't limited by your LSAT scores, but I'm just trying to let you know how important it is. There's actually a correlation between how well people do on the LSATs and the bar passage rates. So the lower down you go in the LSAT scores, the less likely it is for you to pass the bar. Law schools have statistics and things about that, but it's just important to understand. And that's why people from the best law schools come out and get the best jobs usually, because they have the most potential aptitude. But you also show a lot of aptitude if you didn't go to the best type of law school. The best highly ranked law school would do very, very well there. So almost every local law school in New York City, whether it's Pace or New York Law School or whatever, the people that are the top of their class are always get jobs with the best firms in New York. But what happens is people do go to the best law schools, and then after several years, because they've made the wrong career decisions and they've done the things that I'm going to recommend you do, not done the things I've recommended you do, their careers die. Whereas people that make the decisions I'm going to talk about today about your career, their careers, go on forever. One of the things I always like to stress in my webinars and when I talk to people is just how important, and how significant being able to have a career in a law firm is, because you can start your career in a law firm at the age of 25 and you can practice until you're 80 in a law firm, and you can bring in business and you can develop a specialty and you can do all or start your own firm. There's all these things that you can do working in a law firm. And a lot of people make the mistake that they think, oh, well, I can go in-house. If you go in-house, the odds are that you'll have a job for a few years and then won't. That's what happens to most in-house attorneys. If you decide you want to go into the government or something, you can lose your job. Everyone in the government lost jobs under the Trump administration because they just decided they were going to eliminate all these government jobs. So, law firms can be a very good decision. If you understand the factors that matter and how you can do well there, you'll do well. So here are the factors that matter more than where you went to law school. The first thing that matters is your on-the-job training. So that means you're getting trained in a certain practice area at the best possible firm. You could start out in your practice area at a smaller firm and move to a bigger firm. but getting training is very important. Your first 5 years of practice, which are, from when you graduate until you've been out for about 5 years, are all about training. You are paid to basically learn, which is great. I mean, most professions, you would not be paid while you're learning, but you're paid to learn. And it takes about 5 years to become an expert in any practice area. So if you join a firm out of law school, and maybe you move to a better firm after 1 or 2 years, and even a better firm, the better training you get, the more marketable you're going to be for the rest of your career. So anybody that goes to like a major law school, anybody that goes to a major law firm and is there like at Skadden or Latham or something for a few years, they become defined by that because people know that they were able to get trained at a very high level, working for major clients, having certain expectations for the type of work that they did. And so it's very, very important. And also, sometimes people get jobs out of law school, maybe just working for one person or a very small firm. But there's attorneys at that firm that have a very good reputation and know the practice area very well and can train them. They show that they can stay there for a long time working for that person or for a few people. And that's also very positive, that training. I place people that have worked for solo practitioners and they were well trained and had good experience. I had one woman not too long ago, she was in Texas and she was working for a solo practitioner that had a very good reputation in health law. And I was able to get her 2 interviews with major like AmLaw 100 law firms just because of the reputation of the person she was working for. So that's can be highly valued. You can sometimes training outside, the law firm is something that is highly valued, which I'm sure you'll understand. So for example, if you get a clerkship with a federal district judge or a federal judge, like that's a form of training that there's going to be certain expectations for the type of work you do. You're going to be getting mentored by someone that is going to help you with your writing. And you could work in the patent and trademark office if you want to be a patent attorney, and that's a certain form of training. Or you could work in the prosecutor's office or the U.S. Attorney's office, and those are forms. So whatever the training you get to be an attorney, the better that training is, and the more respected that training is in the legal community, the better off you're going to be. So you come out of school, your objective should be to get training, to get, where are you getting trained? Are you getting trained by the best people? Are you getting trained in a way where you're working on the most important matters? So the better training you get, the better off you're going to be. Now, another thing, that matters as much as, where you went to law school is how well you did in law school. So if you did well at any law school and you're at the very top of your class, then the prestige of that matters less and less because it shows, people graduate from small local law schools and they end up like in the top, 5 students in their class. Those people will usually get very good jobs. I mean, there are schools in California that are like unaccredited and stuff, which makes that almost an impossibility. But for the most part, if you did very well in any type of law school, that can help you. And so, how well did you do at that law school? What happened to you, and that matters. But one of the most important things is the third one, is the practice area. So, the practice area you're in determines your marketability. Different practice areas at different points in time are very marketable. So when the market is very good for the economy is doing very well and plugging along, the corporate law is a good practice area. If the economy isn't doing well, then corporate isn't a good practice area. It just depends. Like I was working not too long ago with a corporate attorney at Cravath, which is an incredible firm. But that attorney decided they didn't want to be a corporate attorney anymore. And he said that it was kind of like being a glorified clerk, not interesting, busy work, unenjoyable. And he feels that switching to litigation instead of corporate will be a lot more interesting for him. And, unfortunately, if you want to switch practice areas and you've had experience in something, the odds of you being able to make a switch like that are very slim. People are interested in people that are committed to their practice area. They want to see people that are doing one thing, hopefully, and not a bunch of things. When I look at 85 to 90% of the resumes I review at BCG are good. And it's unfortunate because, most attorneys would have much better chance of getting a job if they had the resume was fixed. And so what do you do to fix your resume? If you want to be one type of attorney, then your resume should say nothing. It should only refer to you being that type of attorney. It shouldn't refer to you being other types of attorneys. It should just say, I want to be a commercial litigator. I want to be an IP litigator. I want to be a trust and estates attorney. I want to be a corporate M&A attorney. It shouldn't refer to a bunch of practice areas. A lot of times attorneys will be very proud A litigator might be proud that they did trademarks and did a real estate transaction, whereas when you look at jobs, the jobs are never looking for people to do multiple practice areas. They're only looking for people to do one practice area. So your resume should always, as much as you possibly can, just focus on one practice area. That's it. You don't need multiple practice areas in your resume. And the practice area you're in matters a lot. So, what type of practice area works for you, and what type are you going to have the most long-term success in? So, one example is if you don't get a lot of business, at some point in your career, litigation could be a very difficult practice areas to advance in, because there's so many litigators. There's just litigators everywhere. And as you get senior, it's very difficult to stay employed as a litigator unless you have business. The corporate attorney for Cravath, because the training there for corporate work is so exceptional and so well respected, could get a job anywhere in doing corporate, but not in litigation. There's just too many litigators. I mean, they're literally like climbing out of the walls. If you drive down almost any middle class or upper middle class street in America, there's going to be litigators on there. There's literally litigators coming out of the walls. So litigation would be a good practice area, but as you get more senior, it can become a drawback. I mean, there's all sorts of practice areas where if you have a good background, then you decide you want to go into that practice area, where you're going to have a very good chance of being employable throughout most of your career. So most attorneys, for example, will go to school and they'll major in English, political science, anthropology, or whatever thing that they think seems fun. Very few of them are majoring in things like physics or computer science or electrical engineering or chemistry. They just don't do that. And because of that, when those type of people become attorneys, it's very rare. And so a lot of these people become patent attorneys. And because they're in that practice area, there's a very small percentage of attorneys that graduate from law school that have those type of scientific backgrounds and become patent attorneys. So if you become a patent attorney or someone becomes a patent attorney, you literally, if you get a couple years of experience, are pretty much always going to be employable. It could be at a small firm, it could be someplace, but you're always going to be employable if you're a patent attorney, because of the law of supply and demand. There's just not enough patent attorneys for the number of jobs. Now that's changed recently. It's becoming that there's more patent attorneys than there are than there are jobs. But those people, if they do very broad job searches, can generally get something. There's other practice areas like ERISA and executive compensation, which again is a practice area that's very niche. There's not a lot of people that do it. And so I see pretty much anybody that I work with that's in that practice area, if they want to do a search and they're not limiting themselves to some sort of geographic area, can get a job. I've had people like in Indiana get multiple jobs in Texas that do it, and they've never even been to Texas, or people that do this in Portland, getting jobs in Chicago. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity for anybody that's in a very niche practice area like that. Corporate is another one. So even though there may be a lot of corporate attorneys, it's still a very marketable practice area, because there's always areas of the country where there's not enough corporate attorneys. So one example would be, I had a woman, I was very sad. She was about 6 or 7 months out of law school, and her boyfriend committed suicide, and she was at a big firm in Silicon Valley. Well, she was a corporate attorney. She might have had like 8 or 9 months of experience, but she had almost a year of experience, and she was trying to find jobs in Silicon Valley, and no one would hire her, because they had the choice of whether they hire someone that has experience and is currently working, or would they take a risk on her. So I worked with her and got her jobs all over the country, in Minneapolis and Cincinnati and all these different areas where there weren't enough corporate attorneys. So corporate is a good practice area, especially when the market gets active. When the market's active, there's not enough corporate attorneys based on the amount of work, so everybody wants corporate attorneys. So that's a good practice area. Real estate is a good practice area. People are always buying and selling real estate, and buying and selling real estate notes and so forth. So this can be a very good practice area to be in. It doesn't mean that you will be able to get a job in some markets, like New York may be a very competitive market because there's a lot of people trying to do real estate there. But even there, I was just talking to a real estate attorney this morning that's in his 60s and still getting jobs doing work for firms that have work. And even though he's like a counsel or associate, the person doesn't have any portable business. Real estate's good. You can always get jobs in real estate. Healthcare is really good. There's not by a major stretch of the imagination, there's not enough healthcare attorneys. how serious is the lack of healthcare attorneys? I mean, I've had some incredible things happen. I had one woman that was working for some hospital system in Nashville, had never worked in a law firm, but had this kind of niche experience she got working for this hospital system in healthcare law. And she was interviewing with law firms. And on one law firm interview, it was a phone call, not a Zoom. She showed up with her husband for the interview, who was also asking questions. I mean, just this kind of thing is unheard of. And she ended up getting a job with the firm even after that happened. Immigration, there's always lots of immigration attorneys, immigration jobs out there. It's very, very easy for immigration attorneys to get jobs. They can get jobs throughout their career. There's always work. There's work in every city, in every state. It's a federal practice here. It's very good. Almost every single trust and estates attorney that I'm working with, and I'm talking about a lot of them. I don't want to tell you how many because it will blow your mind. I mean, but they're all getting interviews. So almost every trust and estates attorney at this point in time is marketable. It doesn't matter how senior you are. There's just not enough trust and estates attorneys for the amount of work there is out there. So that's a very good practice area. So thinking about your practice area, like I'm just, listing off a bunch of practice areas, but anytime you're in a practice area where the law of supply and demand, meaning there's not enough of you, then you're likely to have quite a bit of luck in your search. Let me see if I can open something here just to show you some more examples of practice areas, because I do think it's very interesting, like how marketable people are based on the choice of the practice area that they choose. Let me just open something. I'm just going right now to the BCG database, and I want to show you some practice areas and kind of how that works. So let's see here, practice area. Where's the practice area? There's all these practice areas. Okay, so you have all these practice areas. So if someone was an alcohol and beverage law attorney, they would have a good choice. There's very few of those. If someone was a antitrust attorney, there's very few of those. Different art museum law. I mean, there's not going to be a lot of jobs in these practice areas, but if you have experience doing something like bankruptcy is always kind of marketable. There's always going to be bankruptcy work. Construction is a very marketable one. There's not enough construction law attorneys. So that's a good niche practice area. And you have all these different types of corporate work. You have asset management, that's a good one. Investment management, you have securities, you have all these different things. And the reason I'm showing you all this is I'm showing you this because the practice area you choose is going to make you marketable regardless of the law school you went to. There's very few education attorneys. Most education attorneys can get jobs. Energy, oil, and gas is an interesting one. There's very few energy, oil, and gas attorneys, but this is one that's very dependent on the administration, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, and what's going on with that can be difficult. Entertainment is a very risky practice area because everybody wants to be an entertainment attorney and there's just not enough jobs. Environmental land use is another one. Land use is always a good practice area because there's always a lot of land use people and there's never enough work. So, there's never enough land use attorneys. But some of these other environmental things like defense and plaintiffs, like that can, depending on the administration, like that can have a lot to do with whether or not there's work. So that's kind of a risky one. I already talked about ERISA. Family law is an incredible practice area. There's always going to be positions for family law attorneys. You can work in any city, anywhere, no matter how senior you are. That's a very good practice area. Finance and banking and things, those are niche practice areas as well. Project finance is an interesting one, but just keep in mind that there's different types of things are going to be dependent on the economy. Food and drug law is a great one. There's always a demand for those types of attorneys. You have all this government work that's not as good. Healthcare, I talked about that. Immigration's good. Insurance coverage is a good one. There's not a lot of those. There's always a need for insurance defense attorneys. Intellectual property is another one. That can be good. I talked about patent prosecution can be good. There's different types of patent prosecution. There's hard sciences, which is like electrical engineering and so forth. And then there's life sciences. Hard sciences are more marketable than life sciences. Labor and employment, there's always a demand for people to defend against employment lawsuits, and there's always a demand for people to file lawsuits, so that the plaintiffs work. Litigation, you have all these different types of litigation. And so you can see, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but you can see that a lot of these are very niche. So if you have niche training in one of these things where a lot of people aren't doing the same thing, that's very good. So mass tort plaintiffs work, that's good. Mass torts defense, that's good. And medical malpractice is a good one. Medical malpractice plaintiffs and medical malpractice defense. And so the reason I'm just kind of laying all this out for you is I'm trying to show you that there's so many different practice areas. Municipal law is a great one. There's not enough municipal law attorneys. You have, we talked about real estate, tax, there's more tax jobs, but there's way more tax attorneys than there are tax jobs, unfortunately. So that's a very difficult practice area. Trust in estates, I talked about that, and workers' compensation. So the reason I'm bringing up all these different practice areas, I'm just trying to show you, is, as clearly as I possibly can, like the fact that the practice area you choose is going to, there's demand in different practice areas. The more niche your practice area is, the fewer attorneys there are in your practice area relative to the number of jobs matters much, much more in your career than it will matter where you went to law school, because everything's about the law, supply and demand. It's just a way to think about your practice area. Is there more work than there are attorneys that are trained in this practice area? Is there, and so once you get that training, like no one cares if an immigration attorney went to Harvard. No one cares if a trust and estates attorney went to Harvard. I mean, it's a nice thing, but having training in certain practice areas can make a massive difference in your career. The next one that's very important is how long you stay at your jobs and the employment stability you have. So if you were an employer and you saw someone that had worked at 3 firms in 3 years, the presumption is if they come to work for you for their 4th year, they're probably going to stay 1 year. If you have one person that stayed at their last firm for 4 years and now they're looking for a job, the presumption is that person's going to stick around. The presumption is that they did good work, that the firm kept them around, that there weren't problems, they didn't have problems with their work or their personality and so forth. And there's certain people that come into organizations and they do good work, people like them, there's no personality conflicts, and they do well. And other people join firms and they have problems with the firm and they don't like how they're treated, they don't like the different policies of the firm and so forth. And so those type of people will often move around and bounce around. and that's a sign that that person may not do well in organizations. So, your employment stability matters a lot. And if someone's hired and they stay there a long time, then the odds are that they're going to stay in their next jobs as well. 2 of the best hires that I ever had, I had one woman I hired that had 8 years of experience at a prior firm, and then I had another woman that I hired that had been at a prior firm for 25 years. When I hired both of them, the one that had been there 8 years stayed at my company for 10. The one that had been her last firm for 25 stayed at our firm for 15 until she retired. And so, what happened with these people is they're people that just come into organizations and make things work. At the same period of time, I would always hire, for whatever reason, it was not smart, I would hire recruiters that had come out of, been at like 1 or 2 or 3 firms in a short period of time. Sometimes, very often, they were fired, and I was talking to them, trying to figure out what to do with them. And they would come into our company, and they would be toxic, and they would also always leave after a year or whatever and have problems and try to get people on their side with these problems. It just wasn't good. But the people that had employment stability would always stay. So if someone's looking at your background and they see that you have a lot of employment stability, and it doesn't matter where you went to law school, and maybe you're in a niche practice area and they're looking at someone else that doesn't have employment stability, may have gone to a better law school, the odds are they're going to take a look at you and think, well, this person is a better risk for us than the other person. One of the most important things for any attorney is to get business. And why is business important? Business is important because essentially what law firms are, people don't really understand this, is law firms are homes for partners with business. So a partner with business will go over to a law firm, and that law firm will provide them an office, they'll provide them secretaries and paralegals, they'll provide them associates, they'll provide them a brand name, they'll provide them collections for their accounts, they'll do all this stuff for the partner with business, and that's essentially what a law firm is. A law firm is there to serve as a partner. So if you have business, then you're very marketable, because if you have business, then law firms will essentially are platforms for people with business. So your goal of any attorney should be to get business. You have to get business. I was talking to a guy today that was very senior. He was maybe in his mid-50s or something like that. And he was asking me, how do you get business? And he was saying, do I cold call people? What do I do? And I'll just give you a quick piece of advice. Like, people get business just by being seen. You don't need to cold call a bunch of people. You just need to be seen. You need to be out there in the community, part of associations. You need to develop networks of people. You need to stay in contact with people you knew in the past. You just need to be seen. You can't sit behind a desk all the time. If you're seen, then that's helpful. People join boards all the time. I remember when I was practicing law, there was a partner that had gotten this huge like case with a hospital generating millions of dollars in fees, and he had only got that work because he was from this city called Downey in California, and he sat on a board of this Downey Community Hospital, and they had some big lawsuit, and he got that and millions of dollars in business from it. So, are you able to start generating business? Because as you get more senior, what happens is, you're billing, say you're at a firm and partners are billing out $1,000 an hour. And as you get more senior, you may have 10 years of experience, your billing rate is suddenly like $800 or $900 an hour. Well, if the client's paying those sort of rates, they're going to prefer to have a partner with that they know doing the work. And partners also prefer to do their own work because a partner may make 50% of the work that of whatever they bill. They'll get to keep half of that, and they give the work out, they may get to keep 15% of it. So I'm just giving you like one kind of example, but it's always in the partner's best interest to try to give work to mid-level associates that cost the client less money and that sort of thing. So it becomes very difficult when you get senior to stay employed. And if you have business, law firms really don't care very much at all about where you went to law school. I mean, some law firms like Gibson, Dunn, and others are going to care about it. But in general, even the AmLaw and other law firms, if you have a big enough book of business, that's really what matters to them. It matters that you have that work and that they can make money off that work. Law firms will typically, with a partner, the partner has $5 million in business. The partner will get paid about 1/3 of that, and then another 1/3 will go to overhead for the firm, paying associates and all that sort of stuff, and then the other 1/3 goes to profits for the partnership, which would also increase your income with that 1/3. I mean, that's just kind of a general idea of how things work, but you need to have business in order to really, it matters, and so it matters much more as you get more senior than when you went to law school. Most attorneys that went to top law schools never are able to generate significant amounts of business. And because they don't do that, they're held back in their careers. The other thing that's important in the legal community is your reputation. So every attorney and every community will develop a certain reputation. You can develop a reputation in Los Angeles. You can develop a reputation in Chicago. You can develop one in Minnesota, Minneapolis, or Oklahoma, wherever, but you have a reputation. And if you have a very good reputation, then law firms are much more likely to be interested in you. So I've had, multiple instances where I called someone about a candidate and they'll just say, yeah, we're familiar with this person. We'd love to meet with her or talk about it because we're familiar with the reputation. It happens at the very best firms. The law firms will see someone from a certain background and think, okay, we're interested in this person because of their background. So, if you do have a good reputation in the legal community, then that's it works. I once knew an attorney, it's kind of a funny story. He was at Morrison and Foerster in the summer, and then there was a recession in the legal market, and he checked his mailbox one day, and there was this is back in late 80s, early 90s, and there was actually late 80s, and he opened the thing, and there was a check, and the check said, you can take your chances. We're not gonna, even think about bringing you on until December instead of September. Or you can take this check and just consider, and find a job on your own. The check was for like $30,000. So he took the check. The only job he could get was doing insurance defense, and which isn't great. So he did that for 7 or 8 years, and then one day he was in a trial with a partner, Quinn Emanuel, and he did such a good job in that trial that the partner came and said, we'd love to have you work for us. Like, you're just amazing. Like, and he was just so impressed. So that guy got a reputation based on the work he did. So the longer you're out of law school, if you're able to develop a really positive reputation wherever you're at whatever city or wherever you're at, and you do really well and people think of you very highly, then that reputation can help you get into a much better firm than other people that may have gone to better law schools. Your reputation, just like your business, just like your practice area, all those things become just of major importance the longer you're out of law school. The other thing is just, and I've sort of talked about this previous things, but your interest in your practice area, your involvement in the legal community, like how involved are you? Like, what are you doing? You could be involved in bar associations. You could be speaking at seminars. You could develop like a real kind of reputation as someone that's very interested and committed to your practice area. And you become well known. You could write articles, and you could commit, contribute to treatises and all these things. And the more of a kind of a go-to person you're seeing in your practice area in whatever community you're in, the more that's going to matter the more you went to law school. And I see resumes all the time of a lot of very good attorneys, and they have all these papers and speeches and other things that they've done that help them a great deal if they want to look for a new job in a really good firm. They look like they're very, very strong, committed to the practice area. Clients like that. I mean, one of the ways to think about it is like, imagine you had brain cancer and you were very concerned about this brain cancer. And so you were comparing doctors, and one of them was this expert in brain cancer that had written all these papers and been on all these committees about brain cancer, and was just very, very interested in it. And then there was another attorney, another doctor you're looking at for brain cancer, and the doctor said they did brain cancer, but they also did lung cancer, and then they worked on all these different things, and and they hadn't written any papers about brain cancer, they weren't in committees. I mean, you would choose the person that had like kind of a beefed up resume about brain cancer. And so that's how clients are. Clients, when they're looking for attorney, want people that are experts, and when law firms are hiring people, they want people that look very, very strong as well. So you want to hire people that are committed to their practice area and that look like they're very good. And very few attorneys think about this. They sit around, they talk about how they went to this great law school or maybe worked at this big firm, but then they never come across as someone that looks like the choice of anybody, like a firm that wants an expert in that practice area or a client that wants an expert in that practice area. They need to look like that. And most people come out of law school and they're just kind of flakes. They never commit to anything. Their resume doesn't really say a lot other than they worked at a firm and went to a law school and maybe do a practice area. Their resume's not beefed up. They don't have like all this commitment. They don't look like they're committed. They don't look like they know what they want to do. They're just kind of these cogs in the law firm or the legal world that don't have any sort of commitment or look like they're very, very strong. I see people all the time that just have interest in like these just small things. I had one candidate of mine that I placed her like 25 years ago, and then she worked at a big firm for maybe 10 years, and then she became an expert in doing these like software services contracts, and suddenly has written papers on it and all this stuff, and suddenly has a good business. Like she's doing that and has a lot of people coming to her, and she writes about them, and just having this commitment to something. Very few people have that. So if you have that, that's going to set you apart. The other thing is like, and this is important, and I don't like bringing it up too much, but if you're very conduct yourself well, if you're very attractive and you have a very good personality, that can help you. I don't like saying this, but I see, if I see a woman and I see her law school and the law firm she's at, and I look at her profile picture online, and I mean she's usually, a lot of times if she didn't go to top law school, she might have a striking presence, and or she may have a really, really good personality, and so that can help you. It's sad to say, but people that men that are very tall and square jaws and things, I mean, it just there's different types of people have different physical presences, and they're better dressers. And I don't like saying this. I mean, I'm not saying that I believe this is how the world should be or anything. I'm just saying that I notice this and I notice a pattern. So if you have this sort of presence and looks and things, I mean, it can help you, and it's just the way it is. And it doesn't matter, the law firms are still hiring them based on whether they can do the work, but having certain types of people is important. Men that are very tall or handsome have a edge. Women that are very tall and attractive, I mean, it's just kind of how it is. People that dress very well, it's the same thing. And it just means that if you have certain physical characteristics, you often do well. I was reading an article in Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday, and it was talking about these men in Washington, D.C. getting the surgery to like make their jaw more square or something, because that is a sign of power, I guess, of the way the men think. Women will do the same thing with different types of surgery and stuff as well. I've worked with people that received a lot of job offers, and I haven't seen what they look like, and and a lot of times they can do well. I mean, it's just I don't like saying any of this. I mean, I've seen women go into firms and look like they're single. I mean, it's just how it is. And so a lot of times your looks and things can matter. And bad personalities can make a difference. You can be very attractive or whatever, and you might have gone to a great law school, but you just don't have a good personality. Years ago, I was trying to hire people from UCLA that had been recent graduates to work for me, and UCLA sent me a bunch of resumes to review of people that didn't have jobs like after they graduated. And I would meet these people, and their personalities just were often horrible. Like these wet handshakes and just no drive or personality. And so that can make a difference even if you went to a good law school. Your personality, and so personality matters a great deal. Like how likable are you? How well do you connect with people and so forth. So you need to be able to connect with people. You need to make people like you, and people will hire people that they like. And I've seen people not do well because they have bad personalities. I've seen people do very well because they've got good personalities. I've seen people that are exceptionally attractive do better than you would think they would do because of that. It's just all this stuff can matter. But here are some facts. I mean, again, I'm just telling you what I've observed. People that are thin have a better chance of getting a position than if they're overweight. People that are very attractive are more likely to get hired than people that aren't. Young people are more likely to get hired. If you come out of law school and you're 25 and you come out of law school and you're 50, the person that's 25 is more likely to get hired than the person that's 50. It's just how it works. People that are very good dressers, that are well put together, and very very sharp dressers are much more likely to get hired than frumpy people. It's just how it works. When you look at President Trump, former president, or however you want to talk about him, very sharp dresser, always wearing a tie, always wearing a coat. And then you look at Senator Fetterman, walking around the Capitol in shorts. I mean, people that are, conduct themselves well and dress well are much more likely to get ahead. People that are tall are much more likely to get jobs most of the time than short people. Now, again, I'm not saying I condone any of this. I'm not trying to, take sides in any of this. I'm just telling you how it is. People that are socially withdrawn and nerdy types are less likely to get hired than people that are social. So personality matters a lot, and it matters more many times where you went to law school. So are you working on your Are you working on your personality? Are you trying to be outgoing? What are you doing? I remember when I was working in a large law firm, New York law firm, and I was out to lunch or something with other associates, and there was a mid-level associate talking to the other associates, and he said that something about a partner that was like the top partner there, and he said when this guy walks into a room and he's billing a client all this money, he better look like the most impressive, best looking, best put together person in that room, because the client wants to feel that that's who's representing him. So if you look and sound good, you have a personality, good personality, clients like that. Clients like when they see people that are very well put together and look very formidable and well dressed. That makes them feel good because that's who is going out and representing them. So that matters. The other thing is your racial and social background. So what do I mean by that? I mean that inside of law firms there is discrimination, and there's also reverse discrimination. So people will hire based on religious background. So a firm that's composed, I've seen firms that are composed mainly of Catholic men. I mean, I'm saying men as the exclusion of women, and they're more likely to hire other Catholic men than they would be an Orthodox Jewish man. A law firm composed of mainly Black women is going to be much more likely to hire a Black woman than they are to hire a white man. A law firm composed of people that are mainly Hispanic are more likely to hire Hispanic males than not. A firm, white feminist is more likely to hire other white feminist women than white males. Same thing, Jews likely to hire more likely to hire than the Jews. And I'm not saying that I approve of any of this. I'm not saying that I condone it. I'm just saying that's what I observe. And people will hire people that they're most comfortable with, and they're most comfortable with people that have shared backgrounds, whether they be religious or social or geographic. It's just kind of how it is. And people from certain geographic areas are more likely to get hired than people that aren't from that area. It's people that some law schools or law firms are composed of people that went to local law schools. In Detroit, there's all these local law schools. You have University of Detroit, I don't know if that's called that anymore. You have Wayne State, you have all these different local law schools, and there's law firms composed of those people. So, people that are from, there's law firms composed of people that are from sort of upper class type backgrounds, and they're more likely to hire people like that. And People without handicaps are more likely to be hired than people with handicaps. Women in Middle Eastern, backgrounds are often, I don't know why this is, but they're more likely to get hired often than white women. White males are more likely often, white firms get hired than black males. Asian males are actually much more likely most of the time to get hired than white males. White females are less likely to get hired than Indian females. College athletes are more likely to be hired than non-athletes. And so there's all these things that I've observed. I'm not making judgments about this, but that's just how it is. And so it means that, whatever your background is, you need to try to use that to your advantage in terms of finding firms that are composed of people like you. And if you're able to do that, you're able to kind of be part of a certain tribe, that's going to help you more than that will help you. And it's more important in many cases than your law school. And then, if you want to work in a large law firm, one of the most important things is going to be your commitment to working in that type of firm. So if you take time to go in house or do something else, it's not a good thing. You generally need to, continue once you try to start working in law firms and you work in a large law firms, you need to continue trying to work there as long as you can. If you take too much time off, if you go in house, if you go in from government, this is not a good thing because it shows a lack of commitment to being a lawyer in a law firm, and that's not going to help you. So you have to be committed to doing that. So again, the legal career is a race. I think I made that point pretty clearly. Your objective is to stay in the race as long as you can. You have to do the things that are more important than where you went to law school, which are making sure that you're making the right choices about your practice area, making sure you show commitment, trying to get out there and be seen in the legal community, trying to find firms that are composed of people like you. And firms will not open up to people because they went to Yale, Stanford, or some other great law school. People from Yale, for example, all the time will get out of law school and go do some like public interest work for a couple of years, and then maybe work in the government and then decide they want to go back to a law firm, and no one cares. Like they're just not interested in the person. So just because you went to a good law school doesn't mean you've made the right choices in your career. And a lot of people won't make the right choices. They won't show work ethic. They won't show commitment to working in a law firm. They'll do all these things that are less important than where you went to law, they won't do the things that are more important than, where you went to law school. I see people, attorneys all the time that have great educational qualifications, and they go out in interviews and talk about what they want, their hours, the pay, like lifestyle balance of things. And then that gets them disqualified. And then there's these sort of people will often be unemployed or underemployed, and because all they have in their resume is where they went to law school. Just think about your career. Like, are you going to commit to your practice area? Are you going to be seen as a leader in that practice area? Like, what are you going to do to stick out and look strong? And a lot of people don't. They flounder. And, you need to play the game. And I see so many people from good law schools making so many career decisions. They never commit to a practice area. They never become seen as an expert. They never work on getting business. They never think their personality is important and all these things. And they don't do well. But if you understand kind of the rules that I'm talking about, you can have a very long and successful legal career. Okay, so we'll take a quick break for just a couple minutes. After the break, what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll answer some questions. I do have a little bit of a time crunch today because I have to catch a flight, but I'll answer several questions. If I don't answer your questions this week, if you ask them next week, I will try to answer them next week. I'm going to try to answer today questions that are just related to kind of the presentation as opposed to general career questions. So if I don't answer your questions today, then you can ask them next week, and I will. What was the other thing I was going to say to you? Yeah, so I think that's about it. So I'll just take a quick break, and then when I come back, I will take questions. So just give me like 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll come back. Oh, the other thing I just wanted to say is I think that often the most important part of the webinar is the questions, because it enables you to kind of get more insight into what I've been talking about. And the Q&A was arguably the most important part of the presentation. So just give me 1 minute, and then when I come back, I will do questions and answers. Thanks. Okay, so we'll go to questions. Give me just 1 second. Questions and answers. First question. Okay, so the first question. I graduated from top law school over a decade ago, but since then my practice has been a smaller regional firm. Given that BigLaw is less about my school and more about other factors. How can I reposition myself to be competitive again, especially when I haven't recently worked at a nationally recognized firm? So again, like if you went to a top law school and then you've been at smaller regional firms, the most important thing to be competitive with larger firms again is going to be having some sort of commitment to your practice area and looking like you're kind of an expert in that instead of, you can do that at smaller regional firms. And then hopefully you're able to get a good reputation in your practice area and then hopefully build up a book of business. So once you have business, it's always going to be they're always going to be marketable. I mean, your billing rates are going to be a factor in all sorts of things. But if you're able to, generate a good book of business, you're always going to be able to do fairly well. Let's see here. I've always been strong in performance reviews, but I'm introverted and tend to not sell myself during interviews. What specific traits or stories should I highlight, especially with firms that value drive from confirmed citizenship over a flashy background? Okay, so there's nothing wrong with being introverted. So I was actually talking to someone about this today. And, if you're in high school and you're someone that, likes debate, but everybody that's really popular at your school does football, and you think you should be a football player, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you like to debate. That just means that's where your skill set lies. Your skill set lies in debate as opposed to being an athlete. So certain people have the ability to really sell themselves and other people are introverted, and law firms have people in them all the time that are introverted and do work. Then they have people that are extroverted. So, law firms typically have what are called minders, grinders, and binders. And so what a minder is, it's someone that kind of watches all the people doing the work. And then there's binders, which are people that go out and get business and bind with people. And then there's grinders, which are the people that do the work. So there's nothing wrong with being a grinder. That's just the way it is. You have to be kind of the person that you are. Should you, if you can't sell yourself well in interviews, what's going to sell you is your background, meaning your practice area, and your commitment. Those are, two of the most important things that I think. Okay, I'm 7 years into practice and wondering how do firms actually assess whether I'm performing at the level they expect, but they don't rely on the schools or proxy more, the particular metrics, accomplishments, or signals that they pay close attention to. So if you're, the log you out of law school, the law firms are going to be concerned about your expertise in your practice area, like how good are you in your practice area? How competent are you in your practice area? So they're really kind of looking at that. As you get further out, like say you're 7 years out, the law firms are going to, start looking at you as someone, are you going to be able to generate business, or how much money can you make them, or how do you look to clients? And so they're looking for all these things. And then they're also interested in whether or not they have enough work to give you. So does the law firm feel like they can make money with you? I mean, are you able to work very hard and build a lot of hours and stay busy? Are you able to get work from partners that have partners and give you work? And are you able to stay busy? These are all the things that a law firm is going to be most concerned about. You mentioned that law firms care more about consistency and upward mobility than law school prestige. I had a few years where I moved around due to family obligations, and my resume looks a bit scattered. How do I present my narrative in a way that shows I'm stable and desirable candidate for a major firm? So if you've moved around a lot and had a lot of breaks in your resume, like that's going to be difficult. I'm not trying to be negative here, but if you think about it from the law firm's point of view, would you want to hire someone that's been bouncing around with no consistency, or would you want to hire someone that is consistent? So law firms typically will have their choice of people. They'll have the choice between hiring someone that looks stable and that they think is going to be committed, and they have a choice between hiring someone that's not stable and doesn't look as committed. So if someone is not stable and doesn't look as committed, then then the law firm, obviously, if you were a law firm, they're going to prefer the person that looks more stable and more committed. So how do you fix that? The way to fix that is to get your next job and stay committed and look stable for a period of time. So, if you have a couple of years where there's instability, then you need to get the best job you possibly can. And then once you get that job, you need to show stability. And so it's very important to show stability. One of the first things that I learned as an attorney, and someone taught me, is you should never stop practicing law. Like you always have to have work to do. You always need to be working. And if you're not working consistently, then you lose access to work. So the whole name of the game of an attorney is to really always stay busy and have work to do. So you have to fix that narrative in terms of what's happening going forward. Now, sometimes the economy will be such there won't be enough people in your practice area. Large law firms will have a difficult time hiring people, and then you can get in based on that. But that's not something that's happening all the time. Okay, as someone who went to a lower ranked law school but ended up doing very well in my firm, I often feel like I have to overcompensate during interviews. How do I know when to stop defending my background, instead shift the conversation toward value and contribution? Is there a tactical way to steer the discussion? Well, when you're interviewing the firm, they're often, not going to be that concerned about where if they're interviewing you, the law school you went to is not most often not top of their mind. What's top of their mind is whether you look like someone that they believe that they can make money from. So, are you someone that's going to work hard? Are you someone that is going to be easy to manage? Are you someone that's going to, be stable? I mean, they're looking at all those sorts of things, and they're actually, once they're interviewing you, that's much more important than law school. I mean, sometimes you'll interview with firms where everybody went to a top-ranked law school, and you'll get an interview there, and there is some snobbery in some firms, and they may not be interested in moving forward with you for that. But most of the time, that's not the case. Okay, next question. These are good questions, by the way. Thank you. I worked in government for most of my career, and while I have solid litigation experience, I know I'm not a traditional big law candidate. What are some unconventional ways I can demonstrate the value of my background, like impact litigation or regulatory experience, if law firms are looking for high value skills beyond education? Okay, so it's very difficult to get into a large law firm with most of your experiences in government. The reason for that is because when government is a different practice setting, so there's different expectations. You're not billing your hours. You're not billing for paying clients. You're basically working for the government. Expectations are different, so it can be very difficult to get back into a law firm if you're coming from the government. There are some firms in DC and so forth which take people from the government all the time, but it becomes very, very difficult, to get into big law if you haven't worked in there. I mean, people that decide they want to go in the government after law school are making career decisions. And those career decisions, I don't want to say it in a negative way, but they have consequences. So choosing one practice setting over another is something that's going to have, consequences throughout your career. Going through all these questions. Because the next question is, I only have a few more minutes, but I've had success in bringing in smaller clients, but nothing in the corporate or institutional space yet. If firms care more about future potential in law school rank, how can I frame this in my business plan to pitch or make a case for upward mobility with them? Okay, so large firms, they care more. If you're trying to get a job in a large law firm, they're not interested in smaller clients. They're interested in larger clients, like companies and that sort of thing. So they want to hire people, that have the ability to do work often on behalf of large clients, and that they bring in that type of business. So smaller clients, unless they're paying, very high billing rates and so forth, aren't going to matter to law firms as much as, someone that has the ability to bring in larger clients. So they want larger clients. So you could develop a large book of business with smaller clients, and that would give you the ability to move to other law firms that are working for smaller clients, which is, if that's who you are, you're like most attorneys in the country are working for smaller clients. So 90% of them, or maybe more. But if you want to work in a larger law firm, you're going to have to learn how to bring in the larger clients. I've developed a niche expertise, prestigious by traditional big law standards, but is increasingly relevant due to regulatory changes. If law firms prioritize long-term value of a law school prestige, how do I convince them my niche, though obscure, has strategic value worth investing in? Okay, so you don't have to convince the firms of this. Typically, if you have some sort of niche expertise, you will see those firms advertising jobs. You will see, those positions, or you can apply and send your resume to firms that do that kind of work or are trying to develop the type of work. You can read about that in legal publications online. You can, figure out firms that are doing that type of work. But sometimes, like what you're talking about, like some sort of expertise can suddenly become very valuable to large law firms. Like you had that happen with data privacy was one not too long ago. And different types of healthcare law, like things related to healthcare billing and stuff, can matter. So different things will happen at different times in different niches, and so suddenly you can find yourself marketable to large law firms, even if you don't have large law firm experience and have the niche expertise. Healthcare law, there's different aspects of that right now, where people have this niche expertise and may not have worked in large law firms, but have worked in healthcare systems and so forth, where those attorneys are now relevant where they weren't before. So a lot of times it just depends on things like that. Okay, you mentioned that large firms value people that are committed to the practice of law for the long haul. I've taken time off to pursue a graduate degree in a non-legal field that's related to my practice. How do I address this detour in a way that strengthens rather than weakens my case for reentering BigLaw? Okay, so a lot of times, people that take time off, do a graduate degree and that sort of thing. I mean, you're basically deciding that that's more important to you than practicing law. And so you're just making career and life decisions. It doesn't mean you can't get back to a large law firm, but it just means that you have interests that are not related to necessarily practicing law in large law firms. And so, you once you make that decision, that's your decision. So you just need to realize that any type of decisions that you make in your legal career are going to affect your future marketability. So if you do that graduate degree, can you still go back to a law firm? Of course you can. There's people that will hire you. But getting into a large law firm, if a large law firm is comparing someone that took time off to go get a graduate degree compared to someone that didn't, they're going to make the logical choice of hiring someone that is committed and still working in a big law firm compared to you. You would do the same. Make sure I got everything. I'm just going through these. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions related to the webinar. I appreciate everyone being here today. I will, if I didn't answer your questions today, I realize I'm kind of running a little short here. Then I will definitely answer any questions that I didn't get to today next week. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And I will be back next week. Bye.